to discuss this tonight are two people who followed the story in depth. Mzwandile Mbeje, you'll know, of course, a senior political reporter here at the SABC. He covered the testimony of Angelo Agrizzi that implicated Gavin Watson in corruption. James-Brent Styan is the author of the book, The Bosasa Billions, co-author, I should say. There's a person who's worked with them. James-Brent Styan is in Cape Town for us, and Mzwandile is with us. James-Brent, let's start with you. Good evening to you. Gavin Watson, the key figure in Bosasa, he was the CEO. How did the company get so big, firstly? It is one of these companies that almost everyone had heard of.
How did it get so big? Well, he was a good businessman by all counts and measures. But the question is, the way they grew, did about 12 billion rands worth of business with the state. And what's been happening at the State Capture Commission, that's kind of cast aspersions as to, did they get too big too quickly, and was it due to the friendships and the long-running, close-running ties that he had built up over many years?
Gavin Watson's relationship with figures in the ANC goes all the way back to the UDF, I think as far as the 1970s.
Yeah, for sure. The four brothers, Gavin was the eldest, Cheeky Watson the most well-known and the youngest from the Eastern Cape. They were members of the ANC in the 70s and the 80s, that's what they've claimed, not only the UDF. And very active. Ronnie, especially the third brother, quite active. And then Cheeky and Valence were the two brothers who were playing rugby in the black townships and refused and took a stance against segregation in sport. So, incredible things that they did in their life, fighting apartheid, doing what so many others were afraid to do. And it's a massively complex character and a complex story.
Mzwandile, you were actually in the room when that video was shown, and it's the video, of course, of Gavin Watson in a safe, counting out money, which we understand for bribery. I mean, that must have been such an important moment, and for everybody, really, a huge surprise that this was happening.
A very huge surprise, Stephen. I mean, for the first time, it lifted, I would say, the lead on what perhaps Bosasa was about. I mean, we have always known that it's perhaps a security company. And of course, not many people were really interested in how they acquired their contracts until one of their own, basically, Stephen, placed the head of Bosasa at the center of almost everything wrong that was happening in that company. So when Angelo Agrizzi took that stand, he basically said, everything we did there was wrong. It was at the instruction of Gavin Watson because you couldn't say no. Why? Because he was politically connected. So he basically painted a picture of a corrupt person who is using other people to really get what he wanted. Of course, notwithstanding what James has been saying. So that kind of like shocked South Africans. And I think that's the reason why his death today is really being followed very closely. And people are having so many questions, Stephen.
I mean, they're very intricate questions to ask. There's the money that Bosasa gave to the ANC as a whole, millions of rand over time, sometimes for election events. Then there's the payment to Andile Ramaphosa that has led to the Public Protector's investigation into the CR17 campaign. Absolutely.
That 500,000 rand, which basically caused all the problems that we've been seeing in the past few weeks relating to CR17. And that was one issue really that everyone was trying to then follow to say, actually, we have known that Gavin Watson has been an ANC stalwart, and of course he's connected to the leaders, but we're not sure about the extent. When then they see that kind of donation towards a campaign of the president, and followed by Stephen, you'd remember the wedding of the son of the president, Andile. So. And then many questions again started to come up to say, so how far does this relationship go? And then you have a situation where a death happens today and people are still wanting to ask so many questions about what exactly was Gavin Watson's role in everything that has been happening. Remember, he has no paper trail.
Okay, I mean, James-Brent, the culture of Bosasa. We understand, for example, that there was a prayer meeting yesterday on a Sunday of all the executives at Bosasa. It seems that this was a common occurrence, that this was how the business was actually being run.
Well, the Watsons are known to have been deep religious roots. Father was a lay preacher. These boys grew up on a farm and very deep religious roots. So it's not a real surprise that Mr. Watson, Gavin, took his religious beliefs through to his business dealings. But certainly the extent to which it went has been described by many people as cultish. They would have 2-hour prayer sessions in the mornings, and if you don't attend, it's frowned upon quite heavily. Pastors would be flown in from all over, and they would be paid large sums of cash money to perform, I suppose you could say, rituals, prayer sessions where Mr. Gavin Watson would have been lying on the ground. So strange happenings like that, which is why people would refer to them as a cult. But just to take a step back, you know, earlier this year in January, when this was first started coming to the fore, and this is really the first time that a real insider, Mr. Angelo Agrizzi, a real insider in estate capture projects, came out and revealed quite a lot of things. But that wasn't the first time Bosasa made the news. About 10 years ago, 2007 to 2009, they were in the news significantly. So there's been this cloud of concern about their business dealings for at least 10 years. And that's why the dealings with the president and his son and others should be so concerning in extent. You know, getting into business with a company where there's this massive cloud of questions hanging around it, which has never been clarified, that kind of started the snowball rolling. And now the names that fell out following Mr. Agrizzi's testimony, and others I would mention, Clinton Ullerman from the SIU, for example, many others, the names that started falling out, you know, in the very highest levels of the ANC and government.
Do we know how much influence they had in the ANC? And this goes to a key question around, we understand that, you know, they gave millions of rand to the ANC, so have many other people. Do we know what kind of influence they had right at the top of the party? Is it possible to even know?
Well, Gavin Watson was known to have no computer, no laptop, no office. So a lot of the stuff, I suppose, would have happened one-on-one in rooms where you and I aren't. So a lot of the extent of it we'll probably never know. But certainly getting 12 billion rands worth of business over a 20-year period is quite significant. If you look at the amounts of money in cash bribes that were allegedly paid out, you know, it's significant. So the full extent of it, I wouldn't know for sure. I don't think it was all about the money. I do think it was also about having access to influence and power, the real positions of power, which is why one might have seen the approaches made to Mzwandile Mbeje, who was paid 2 million rand, by the way, only days before his dad became the president.
Right, and I mean, all of this comes up with the change of the name to African Global Operations. Was that just simply because the name Bosasa had become toxic in some way?
I certainly believe so, yes. I think that they were trying to move on and get away from the stigma that had been around it for quite some time. But, you know, why... Again, we should never have got here. This problem should have been resolved 10 years ago. There was a massive investigation, but, you know, a lot of people seem to have been influenced to have made the investigation go away. This is the only way you can look at it. And until January this year, people kept looking the other way. And now we've had this tragedy, and it is a tragedy, and our condolences do go to the loved ones. But we'll certainly never get all the answers that we've been waiting for.
Well, Mzwandile, I mean, there are political consequences if you don't get all the answers. If you have a nice long court case, we have testimony under oath that we've sort of seen in the Zondo Commission, but in a court process you would have findings of guilt or innocence. Now we're not going to have that. Could that actually make the politics even more muddy than it already is?
It certainly will, Stephen. I mean, so many things, and I think someone like myself who's been covering the commission, hearing his name being mentioned over and over again, not only that, seeing him in those visuals counting the cash. So I was really looking forward to hearing how he was going to, for example, explain away the large sums of cash that he was handling. And of course, some of those allegations that have been put to him to say he's been paying certain individuals. So I wanted to hear that, to say what exactly he was going to say. Now, all that is gone. So once someone goes just like that, so we will be left with so many unanswered questions. And of course, South Africans being South Africans well, I guess they will have so many conspiracy theories around this issue. It will be very interesting, I mean, in the days ahead.
And it's important to mention at this point, Mzwandile, perhaps, that if I recall, after Angelo Agrizzi testified, there were corroborating witnesses who came afterwards. So some of them could still testify in some way.
Well, some of them could still testify. But, you know, one of the things that perhaps was said to be characteristic of Gavin Watson is that he had no computer, there was no paper trail on anything, other than perhaps that video that and then you can't simply say, looking at that video, then there was crime, because what if he had a way of explaining it? So it would be very, very difficult. I think many of the people perhaps who had been implicated, who South Africans were hoping they were going to hear from Gavin Watson explain the relationship with them. So unfortunately, we're never going to know what happened, so how he grew his company. And of course, whatever Angelo Agrizzi was saying, remember, some of the people that he implicated, they dismissed him as someone who was bitter and racist.
Mzwandile Mbeje, thank you very much indeed. Senior political reporter here at the SABC. My thanks as well to James-Brent Styan, who is in our Cape Town studio, co-author of the book, The Bosasa Billions. It's a developing story. We'll keep a close eye on it here at SABC News.